Good morning. Right, so I want to make a cup of tea. I only have one arm because of my stupid injury and because I'm holding my phone. Anyway, I was watching YouTube this morning, like I always do at the moment, and I was watching Anton Petrov's inspired post from the television series Dark, which I have also watched, and it is also fun, and do recommend. And it inspired him to think about time and time travel, and he went into an explanation about time and time travel and current theoretical, models based off of real people and stuff. But I don't really care about that stuff. It got me thinking about it because for a long time I've been trying to think about how you could possibly do time travel in video games that's better than the shit that we've seen so far. It's difficult to explain, but I'll give it a go. The idea that I had so far was that... fuck my leg. The idea that I had so far is that, let's say you're running a real-time strategy engine. Classic, old school. I would love to build one myself. Don't think I'm going to be able to build it in any sort of time frame that makes sense, so I might as well just lay out my ideas. Is that you would have a weapon of sorts, maybe a super weapon, if you're thinking Red Alert 2, Command & Conquer, that sort of thing. A super weapon that is like a time reverse bomb or something, which creates a localized time field which reverses time within that space, right? And that's cool to think about, but you got to think about all the corner cases around how would it work at the boundaries of that. What about matter that doesn't exist? Would it rematerialize? How exactly does it work, sort of thing? And through that thought exercise, I've been thinking about if the boundaries of the time space or the time bomb area would be hard, as in like there would be no attenuation of the time continuum. It would be literally you cross a line and it's in reverse time, or whether it would fade slowly from being normal time into zero back to negative time. Whether material, like I would think that the material wouldn't rematerialize. It simply changes the flow of time, and anything in that space is reverse time. But you have no agency in reverse time, it seems. It feels like if you were to reverse it, you don't technically have agency in real time, you just think you do. But in reverse time, you definitely don't have any agency because things have to go in reverse, which you've already done, so it has to be wound back. So inside the negative time field, you would have reverse time for any objects that exist within that space. Anything that doesn't exist in that space, obviously, is not in reverse. If you were to shoot a bullet, and this is the more interesting stuff, if you were to shoot a bullet into the reverse time field from the outside, even like in a hard line scenario, the bullet would come in one side, and then as it hits the field would cease to exist because it can't exist in the negative space, because then it would be moving out of the field, and it can't exist in the space outside the space because it's moving into the field. So there's like this thin line. And then if you were to attenuate the barrier, then it would slow down until it stops at the boundary, and it would never cross into the it would slowly be squished at the boundary point. And I thought that was a really interesting sort of like experiment, and I thought to myself, all right, cool, so that's for like a bomb. If you were to have this scenario, and I've been trying to think about it in a first-person shooter scenario as well, if you were to have this scenario of like a spherical area of time, could you then wrap that, instead of doing a spherical area, wrap an object in negative time, sort of like a skin modifier, like a a localized area that's just covering the surface of the object that you want to reverse time for. And then, like, anybody on the outside of the time field wouldn't be able to interact with the time field. In fact, if they tried to put their fingers into the time field, they would fuck their, like, they would mush their fingers, and they couldn't take their fingers out of it. It would just rip apart at the seams. So, like, I've always been thinking that there's this barrier between a positive and a negative time field. In the case of, say, like, if you were going to go time travel, like you would see in the movies, it would be like you invert time for everybody except for yourself. And so it's sort of like you maintain a localized barrier around you, but everything else is going in, like, you reverse the polarity of the universe, basically. And then once you've finished moving back in time, you'd flip it back, and then only the localized area around you is moving forward in time. And after watching his, this is like a thoughts that I've had a long time ago. After watching his video, it got me thinking again. And I thought to myself, like, how would I make it so that it makes sense that objects don't mess with the barrier so much? And I thought, if you squish space as well as time, then in the gap between, the objects don't get mushed. The space itself is mushed. So space and time are joined, and instead of having a sort of like a time, localized time area but regular geometry, you'd have a space-time area that's mushed. Now, you're always breaking the rules in video games, because in order to visualize it, you want light to be able to travel, like, regardless. So it's kind of like, what would that look like, now that I'm thinking about it, if you can see into the bubble of space-time, and space and an object is moving into that area, but the object remains whole? Or how would it expand once the field disappears? Like, that's a really interesting idea. Is that, can you pack more into an area if you're time dilating? Like, you see, like, there starts to be really weird edge case things that show up. So I'm going to be thinking about it, like, a lot more as to whether or not it's possible. Like, say, let's use a thought experiment, right? You've got a spherical time space, and instead of, say, something like a bullet, which doesn't have much length, maybe like a pool cue, right? It's long, it's thin. You push it into the bubble, and at the boundary point where negative and positive meet, the geometry of the pool cue would not be mushed in its space-time frame, but from external appearance, it would be mushed. And then what happens if you if you remove that difference, the barrier? Sorry, if you remove this negative space-time field, where does the pool cue expand into? Like, I'm making a nice cup of coffee at some point. Like, where would that space-time move into, and how would it expand? So it's more like, and then if you think you just go expand it, like, whatever, then the idea is how to. I gotta get a cup of coffee. The coffee's all the way in the bottom here. So let's say you've got two pool cues, both pushing in from opposite sides of the space-time, bubble on opposite sides, and they're going to collide tip to tip, sort of thing. So it would be, when you re-expand time, it's as if it's moving in that space at its normal speed. And so when the pull cues touch, they would. But if they're like overlapping, instead of like just regularly touching, they would be overlapping. And if they're already past the point of overlapping, because one side, yeah, because one side doesn't. I mean, how would you know that it's? Would it be like? Would it be like a negative bubble? No, because the stuff doesn't even exist in the space-time. How would it be able to collide? You know, without. So it'd be more like if there was collision, maybe it would be like it'd have to expand at the rate of, like if you collapsed it in an instant, then the pool cues would smash into each other at that speed, the instantaneous speed. You could slowly collapse a space-time bubble, and then as the pool cue tips touch because they're moving, then they would create force backwards. You know, like, so if you were to collapse, so it would be the speed of the collapse is the speed of the object moving, in order to maintain, because you have to maintain coherency within the system. So I think that might be able to work. But to program that, I mean, no video game engines mess with time, you know, like as far as I can tell. They mess with gravity, they mess with light, they mess with a bunch of other stuff, but they're not messing with time, and they're definitely not messing with space-time, as like the engine itself. So it would be, I think it would be really fun to build, like say a 3D engine where space-time exists like this, but you'd have to start from scratch, honestly, like, because there's no way that the pipelines are set up for this kind of thing. Yeah. But I think that would be a way around having actual time travel in a video game that's coherent. It would be time travel. It's not really time travel. It is more like time manipulation. It would appear like time travel to some degree. Like if you were, say, the sole actor in a universe, of like NPCs and stuff, you could flip the polarity of the universe, fast forward at a high rate, and then flip it back with you being in a bubble of forward time, and that would appear like time travel. But there's no branching in this universe. There's no multiple universes. There's no alternate timelines. It's a singular timeline. I think it would be a really interesting mechanic to have, if somebody could pull it off. Okay, I'm gonna go make my cup of coffee now.